24 hours. The time they gave Bumpy Johnson to pay the $50,000 ransom in exchange for his daughter's life was exactly 24 hours. Most fathers would panic immediately and do everything they could to gather the money. But he was different from most fathers. He was Bumpy Johnson. Calmly, he picked up the phone and made one call, then another call, then another call. At the end of 6 hours, exactly 300 people were searching Harlem inch by inch. At the end of 12 hours, the people who had kidnapped his daughter were trying to run. 23 hours had passed, and they were begging. When the 24 hours were up, what happened? No one talks about it. They can't. Even today, when old-timers gather in the barbershops on Lenox Avenue and tell stories about the Godfather of Harlem, they skip the story, because some stories are too dangerous even to remember. What happened that night is too dangerous even to listen to and learn a lesson from. This is the story of the longest night in Harlem's history. The night Bumpy Johnson reminded everyone that his family was not to be touched. The night 3 men learned that $50,000 was not worth more than their lives. This is what happened when they kidnapped Bumpy Johnson's little daughter. In the 1950s, Harlem was a kingdom, and its king was Bumpy Johnson. From 110th Street to 155th Street, all control was in his hands. Even politicians sometimes asked him for help. Even police officers would overlook some of his flaws. Other mafia groups respected the invisible line of his territory. But this man, who was so feared outside in his apartment on St. Nicholas Avenue, in his home, was just a father. His daughter Elise was 8 years old. Her eyes resembled her mother's, her chin her father's. Every morning she walked 4 blocks to go to school. Bumpy Johnson watched his daughter from the window until she turned the corner. He knew very well that he had enemies outside, enemies who would do anything for him to die, who had their eyes on his empire, who nurtured hatred for him in their hearts. Still, he was at ease, because no one had been stupid enough to touch his family, and they could not be. This was an unwritten law. You could try to fight Bumpy Johnson. You could try to kill him. But you could never approach his family. Tommy Malone was a small-time Irish gangster with big-time debts. He ran a gambling operation in Hell's Kitchen that had gone south 6 months ago. Now he owed the Italians $40,000, and they weren't known for their patience. Every week, a man named Carmine visited Tommy's apartment. Every week, Carmine broke something. First it was furniture, then it was fingers. Tommy was running out of things to break. He needed money fast, and he needed a lot of it. That's when he came up with the idea. His friend Vic Santoro knew about Bumpy Johnson's daughter, knew her school, knew her route, knew she walked alone. Tommy's third partner, Ray Cooper, had a car. The plan was simple: grab the girl, demand $50,000, split 3 ways, disappear. Tommy would pay off Carmine and start fresh somewhere warm. Florida, maybe. California. Anywhere but New York. What Tommy didn't understand, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that he wasn't planning a kidnapping. He was planning his own funeral. The morning was ordinary. October air carried the smell of coffee and car exhaust through Harlem's streets. Elise Johnson kissed her mother goodbye, grabbed her school bag, and walked out the door at 8 o'clock sharp. She was thinking about her spelling test, about the new shoes her father promised her, about the jump rope game she would play at recess. She didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street. She didn't see the 3 men inside watching her. At 8:15, she was halfway to school when the car pulled up beside her. The back door opened. A hand grabbed her arm. She tried to scream, but another hand covered her mouth. 30 seconds. That's all it took. The car drove away, turned left on 125th Street, and disappeared into traffic. On the sidewalk, a pink school bag lay abandoned, its contents scattered across the concrete. A spelling workbook, a pencil case with flowers on it, a photograph of Bumpy and Mamie that Elise carried everywhere. The street was empty, no witnesses, no sound except the distant rumble of the elevated train. At 9 o'clock, the school secretary called the Johnson residence. Elise hadn't arrived. Mamie felt the first flutter of panic in her chest. But she told herself not to worry. Maybe Elise had stopped at a friend's house. Maybe she was running late. Children did that sometimes. Mamie called 2 neighbors. No one had seen her daughter. The flutter became a pounding. At 9:30, the telephone rang. Mamie answered with shaking hands. A man's voice, unfamiliar, spoke slowly. "We have your daughter. $50,000. You have 24 hours. We'll call back tonight with instructions. If you contact the police, she dies." The line went dead. Mamie stood frozen, the receiver still pressed to her ear, her whole world collapsing into that single moment. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked to the bedroom, where Bumpy was getting dressed, and stood in the doorway. Her face told him everything before she spoke a word. "Someone took Elise," she whispered. And then she said the words that would unleash hell across Harlem. "They want $50,000. Bumpy Johnson's facial expression did not change one bit. His hands did not tremble, nor did his breathing quicken. He did not panic at all. With masterful calm, he was buttoning his shirt. Anyone watching would have thought he was preparing not for war, but for church. He walked to the phone and dialed a number. "Come to my apartment." The call lasted only 3 seconds. He hung up and dialed another number. He made 15 calls back to back and summoned them to his apartment. Then he sat down in front of the window where he watched his daughter every morning and lit a cigar. Mamie had seen her husband angry many times before. Armed fights, wars, deaths. But this time was different. She had never seen her husband's eyes look like this before. There was a cold wind in his eyes. Mamie shivered. "What are you going to do?" she asked her husband. Bumpy Johnson took a deep breath and replied, "Whatever I have to do." Within an hour, 15 men filled Bumpy's living room. These weren't street thugs or hired muscle. These were captains, lieutenants, men who ran their own crews and answered only to Bumpy. Big Luther stood by the door, 6 feet 5 inches of loyalty and violence. Willie Jackson leaned against the wall, his sawed-off shotgun barely concealed under his coat. Jerome Williams, who ran the shoeshine network across Harlem, sat quietly in the corner with a notebook and pencil. Bumpy addressed them without standing, his voice low and even. "Someone took my daughter this morning. I don't know who yet. I need to know within 3 hours. Every taxi driver, every bartender, every shop owner, every hustler on every corner. I want eyes everywhere. I want ears everywhere. A black sedan, 3 men. White men in Harlem stick out. Someone saw something." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. "Find them. Don't touch them until I say, but find them. And gentlemen, understand this clearly. Whoever took my daughter has 24 hours to live. The clock is already ticking." Hour 6. Harlem transformed into a surveillance machine. On every block, Bumpy's people watched and listened. Shoeshine boys polished boots with one eye on the street. Bartenders poured drinks while cataloging every conversation. Numbers runners, making their daily collections, asked casual questions about strangers, about unusual cars, about anything out of place. Taxi drivers circled the same routes over and over, searching for a black sedan with 3 white men inside. The beauty of Bumpy's network was its invisibility. These weren't gangsters with guns drawn. These were ordinary people, the fabric of Harlem itself, and they all owed Bumpy Johnson something. He had paid their rent when they couldn't. He had kept their sons out of jail. He had protected their businesses from shakedowns. Now they repaid that debt with information. Every scrap of gossip, every rumor, every whispered suspicion flowed upward through the network until it reached Bumpy's apartment. Most of it was useless. But Bumpy knew that somewhere in that river of information, a single drop of truth would surface. He just had to wait. Jerome Williams was a shoeshine man. He had a stand near the Apollo Theater. He was like a sealed box that knew all the secrets of this city. Because people did not really care about the person at their feet. They talked about everything, whether it existed or not. Jerome recorded everything like a computer, in case it might be needed one day. That afternoon, a taxi driver named Peanut came to his stand to have his shoes shined. Peanut looked very tense. It was the kind of tension that looked like he had learned something he was not supposed to know. Stress had gotten to his tongue. He kept talking. Jerome listened calmly. "Aren't these strange days, Jerome?" he said. Jerome did not lift his head, did not change his facial expression. In a calm tone, he asked, "What happened?" Peanut was fidgeting in his chair from stress. "I heard that some Irish idiot from Hell's Kitchen kidnapped someone important. They call him Irish Tommy. Tommy Malone. Can you believe this?" he said. Jerome asked, "Is that so? Where did you hear it?" Saying that news spread quickly around, Peanut got up after paying 50 cents for his polished shoes. Jerome calmly waited for him to walk away. Then he closed his stand early and ran to Bumpy Johnson's apartment 6 blocks away. He had found a name, Tommy Malone. Within 2 hours of getting that name, Bumpy knew everything about him. Born in Hell's Kitchen, 1923. Father was a longshoreman who drank himself to death. Mother still alive, living on Arthur Avenue in the Bronx. Tommy ran numbers for the Irish gangs until he struck out on his own 3 years ago. Gambling operation went bust. Now he owed money to Carmine DeStefano, a Genovese family collector known for his creative use of pliers. Tommy was desperate, stupid, and running out of time. His 2 partners were Vic Santoro, an Italian from Brooklyn with a petty theft record, and Ray Cooper, a driver who had done time for auto theft in New Jersey. 3 amateurs who thought they could kidnap the daughter of Harlem's most powerful man and walk away rich. Bumpy studied the photographs his people had gathered. Tommy's face, Vic's face, Ray's face. He memorized every detail. He knew their habits, their addresses, their weaknesses, but he still didn't know where they were hiding his daughter. That was the only thing that mattered. Hour 12. Tommy Malone stood at the window of an abandoned warehouse in the South Bronx, staring at the street below. His hands were sweating. Something was wrong. He could feel it. The girl was tied to a chair in the back room, gagged but unharmed. Vic watched her, while Ray paced back and forth, chain-smoking cigarettes and jumping at every sound. "We should call again," Ray said, his voice cracking. "Demand the money now. Get this over with." Tommy shook his head. "We wait until tonight." That was the plan. But the plan was already falling apart. They had tried to leave Harlem after grabbing the girl, but every route was blocked. Not by police, by people. Men standing on corners, watching every car that passed. Taxi drivers who refused to pick them up. An invisible net had closed around them, and they had barely escaped into the Bronx before it tightened completely. Now they were trapped in this rotting warehouse, waiting for nightfall, waiting for money that Tommy was beginning to realize might never come. Vic. Santoro burst into the front room, his face pale and sweating. "Tommy, we need to talk. Now." He pulled Tommy away from the window, lowering his voice to a frantic whisper. "I just went outside to check the perimeter. There's a guy across the street, just standing there, watching. And 2 more at the corner. They're everywhere, Tommy. How did they find us?" Tommy's stomach dropped. "They couldn't have. We were careful." "Careful." Vic's voice rose. "We kidnapped Bumpy Johnson's daughter. Do you understand what that means? This man runs Harlem. He's got more eyes on the street than the police. We need to let the girl go and run, right now. Maybe we can still get out of this alive." Ray nodded frantically from across the room. "Vic's right. This ain't worth dying for." Tommy stared at his partners, watching their courage dissolve. He thought about Carmine, about the debt, about what would happen if he came back empty-handed. "We're not leaving without that money," Tommy said, but his voice had lost its conviction. Hour 16. Bumpy got the address from a man who worked as a janitor in the Bronx. This janitor had seen 3 white men entering an abandoned warehouse on East 138th Street 2 days earlier. They had even given him $20 to make him forget what he had seen. Still, he did not forget. He passed the address on to Bumpy. Bumpy could have sent his men to this address and handled the matter very simply. But this was not about business. It was about his family. He had to go and handle it personally. Big Luther objected. "Please don't go alone. Let me come too. At least let me watch your back," he said. Bumpy thought. Luther had been by his side for 15 years. Even if he were not his shadow, Luther would still be with him. He deserved to be at his side again. At midnight, they drove to the Bronx, crossing the Willis Avenue Bridge. Bumpy was sitting in the front seat. He was watching the shimmering city reflected on the black water. But that was not what he was thinking about. He was thinking about his daughter. It was as if he could hear her laughter in his ears. There was a savage calm inside Bumpy. What can this feeling make a person do? Hour 20. Bumpy stood outside the warehouse, looking up at the broken windows and crumbling brick. Luther had disappeared around back, moving silent despite his size. The street was empty. The men Bumpy had positioned earlier had done their job, clearing the area, making sure no one would interrupt what came next. Tommy Malone watched from the second-floor window, his gun drawn, his heart pounding. He saw a single figure approach the front door. Average height, gray overcoat, walking slowly, deliberately, like a man taking an evening stroll. No weapon visible, no army behind him. Just one man. "He's alone," Tommy whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. The crazy bastard came alone. Vic appeared beside him, peering through the dirty glass. "That's Bumpy Johnson." Tommy nodded. "In the flesh." Vic's face went white. There was something about the way Bumpy moved, something about the stillness in his posture that made Vic's legs weak. "Tommy," he said quietly, "I think we made a mistake." Bumpy pushed open the warehouse door and stepped inside. The ground floor was empty, except for rusted machinery and broken pallets. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting weak yellow light across the concrete. He heard footsteps above him, the creak of floorboards, whispered voices. He found the stairs and climbed them slowly, each step deliberate, announcing his presence. He wanted them to know he was coming. He wanted them to wait, to sweat, to feel their courage drain away with every passing second. The second floor opened into a wide space, cluttered with old crates. At the far end, his daughter sat tied to a wooden chair. Tape covered her mouth. Her eyes were red from crying, but when she saw her father, they filled with something else, hope, relief, the absolute certainty that everything would be okay now. Tommy Malone stepped forward, gun raised, pointing directly at Bumpy's chest. Vic and Ray flanked him on either side, their weapons shaking in their hands. "That's close enough," Tommy said. "Where's my money?" Bumpy stopped 10 feet from Tommy, his hands visible at his sides, his face expressionless. He didn't look at the gun. He looked past it, through it, directly into Tommy's eyes. "You made a mistake," Bumpy said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "Most mistakes can be fixed, but some mistakes are permanent. You have about 60 seconds to decide which kind this is." Tommy laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You're not in a position to threaten anybody, old man. I've got the gun. I've got your daughter. You're going to give me $50,000, or I'm going to—" "Tommy Malone," Bumpy interrupted. "Hell's Kitchen, gambling debts. You owe Carmine DeStefano $40,000. Your mother's name is Margaret. She lives on Arthur Avenue, apartment 4B. Goes to St. Anthony's every Sunday, 8 o'clock mass." He paused, letting each word land like a hammer. "Nice woman. She makes excellent cannoli. Brought some to the church bake sale last month." Tommy's gun hand began to tremble. Bumpy reached slowly into his coat pocket. Tommy flinched. Vic raised his weapon. Ray took a step backward toward the fire escape. But Bumpy didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a photograph. He held it up so Tommy could see. It was a picture of Margaret Malone, walking out of church, smiling at someone off camera, completely unaware she was being watched. "I have men outside her building right now," Bumpy said, his voice still calm, still soft. "One phone call, Tommy. That's all it takes. One phone call and your mother never makes it to Mass again. The warehouse went silent. Even the city noise outside seemed to fade away. Tommy stared at the photograph, at his mother's face, at the threat that had just materialized from his worst nightmare. His throat was dry. His hands were shaking. The gun felt heavy, useless, pointing at a man who couldn't be stopped by bullets. "You have two choices," Bumpy continued. "First choice, you untie my daughter, you walk out of New York tonight, and you never come back. Your mother lives. You live. This becomes a story neither of us ever tells." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Tommy's face. "Second choice, I make that phone call." The silence stretched for 10 seconds. That felt like 10 years. Tommy's lips trembled. His voice came out broken, barely a whisper. "Please, I'll go. Tonight. I swear on my mother's life, I'll disappear. Just don't make that call. Please." Then he lowered his gun. "Tommy, what are you doing?" Vic shouted. "We can still—" He never finished the sentence. Vic spun toward Bumpy, raising his weapon, finger tightening on the trigger. A shadow moved behind him. Something heavy connected with the back of his skull. Vic crumpled to the floor like a puppet with cut strings. Big Luther stood over him, materializing from the darkness near the fire escape, a blackjack in his massive hand. Ray Cooper didn't even try to fight. He dropped his gun, raised his hands, and started backing toward the stairs. "I didn't want to do this," Ray babbled, tears streaming down his face. "It was Tommy's idea. I just drove the car. Please, mister, I got kids. I got a family." Luther looked at Bumpy. Bumpy shook his head slightly. Ray stumbled down the stairs and ran into the night, sobbing. Tommy stood alone now, his gun on the floor, his partners gone, his plan destroyed. He couldn't look at Bumpy. He couldn't look at the little girl he had kidnapped. He could only stare at the photograph of his mother, still in Bumpy's hand. Bumpy walked past Tommy without a word and knelt beside his daughter. His hand, steady as stone throughout the entire confrontation, trembled slightly as he removed the tape from her mouth, as he untied the ropes around her wrists. Elise threw her arms around her father's neck and buried her face in his shoulder. "I was scared, Daddy," she whispered. "I know, baby girl. I know." He held her for a long moment, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling her heartbeat against his chest. His daughter. Safe. Alive. Everything else was just details now. He lifted her in his arms and turned toward the stairs. Then he stopped and looked back at Tommy Malone, who stood frozen in the same spot, unable to move, unable to speak. "You have until sunrise to leave New York," Bumpy said. "If you're still here when the sun comes up, my next phone call won't be a threat." He carried his daughter down the stairs, through the empty warehouse, out into the cold night air where Luther waited by the car. Behind him, Tommy Malone sank to his knees on the dirty warehouse floor, knowing his life would never be the same. Hour 24. Tommy Malone boarded a Greyhound bus heading south at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes before sunrise. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and $40 in his pocket. He never returned to New York. Some say he ended up in Georgia, working on a farm, using a different name. Others say he drank himself to death in a Florida motel room 10 years later. No one knows for certain because no one cared enough to find out. Ray Cooper vanished that same night, leaving behind a wife and 2 children who never heard from him again. Vic Santoro woke up in an alley 3 days later with a fractured skull and no memory of how he got there. He moved to California and never spoke about what happened in that warehouse. As for Bumpy Johnson, he carried his daughter home, tucked her into bed, and sat beside her until she fell asleep. Mamie found him there at dawn, still watching over Elise, still dressed in his gray overcoat. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. In Harlem, the story spread through whispers and rumors, growing larger with each telling, but the core remained the same. You don't touch Bumpy Johnson's family. Some men earn respect through violence. Some earn it through money. Bumpy Johnson earned it through something more powerful than both, He earned it through the promise that he would protect what he loved, no matter the cost. And he always kept his promises. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. But his name did not die. It remained a legend. People still talk about him in shops, in homes, in clubs. They talk about his power, his intelligence, his rules. They just do not talk about that night. Because what happened that night was not a mafia feud for Bumpy. What happened that night was a demonstration of what a father can dare to do for his child. Money, guns, territories. Which one could be stronger than a parent's love for their child? I ask you, if someone took your child, what would you do? How far could you go? You can leave your answer in the comments section. If you like this story and want to hear more Bumpy Johnson stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.